If you've ever thought, no HOA would dare mess with a man's boat, let me tell you about the time mine did, and oh boy, did they pick the wrong guy. I'm Nolan Derry, former Coast Guard, current marina engineer, and owner of a waterfront property in a quiet Florida neighborhood called Seabreeze Shores. I bought the place specifically because it included a private dock, emphasis on private. After years of busting my back restoring old ships and helping people navigate hurricanes, I figured I deserved to relax with my own fishing boat, and a cold one on the weekends. That dream lasted exactly 5 months before Judith Zimmerman, Seabreeze HOA president and full-time busybody, decided my boat was community property. Judith was the type you'd hear before you saw, always stomping around in wedge sandals, talking about bylaws like they were the 10 Commandments. She had a platinum blonde bob, a voice like a blender full of gravel, and a clipboard that seemed surgically attached to her hand. She once tried to write someone up for having aggressively colored curtains. It started with a note taped to my front door. Mr. Derry, per Seabreeze HOA guidelines, all docked watercraft must be registered with the association. Please provide access to your vessel for inspection. I crumpled it and tossed it. My dock was on my deed, and I'd already cleared everything with the county when I moved in. No HOA rule could override that. I figured she'd get the message and move on. She didn't. 3 days later, I came home from a long shift to find my boat gone. Just gone. Dock lines were coiled neatly, no signs of damage, not even a footprint on the pier. For half a second I thought maybe I was losing it, but the security camera mounted above my boathouse said otherwise. I pulled up the footage and nearly dropped my coffee. There she was, Judith Zimmerman, standing on my dock in her ridiculous sun hat, waving 2 neighborhood teenagers aboard like she was the captain of a cruise ship. She handed one of them a set of keys. My keys. Then she stood there, watching them untie the boat and speed off across the bay like she was sending her kids to summer camp. I stood there staring at the screen, mouth open. She stole my boat. I called the sheriff's office within 5 minutes. "What's the estimated value?" the deputy asked. "$60 grand, I said. "Give or take," he whistled. "That's felony grand theft. Got the footage?" "Crystal clear," I said, grinning for the first time that day. An hour later, I handed over a copy of the video. I also gave them the HOA paperwork where Judith had tried to claim jurisdiction over my dock just to show her motive. The deputy raised an eyebrow. "She really thought this gave her the right. She thinks she's the law," I said, "but she's about to learn different." The best part. I'd installed GPS tracking in the boat 2 weeks earlier after a buddy's got stolen off a public dock. I pulled up the app and showed the deputy exactly where they were anchored near the island bar, probably sipping piña coladas on my deck with my fishing gear. "Mind if we pay her a visit?" he asked, already walking toward his cruiser. "Oh, I insist." The sheriff's cruiser rolled down the marina road while I followed behind in my truck. The GPS tracker on my phone showed the boat hadn't moved from its location a few hundred yards offshore. The deputy radioed ahead to the marine unit, and within 20 minutes, we were pulling up to the pier where the department's patrol boat was docked. As we boarded, I could already feel my jaw tightening. The idea of someone poking around my vessel, especially someone like Judith, turned my stomach. I didn't care about the drinks they were probably spilling on the deck cushions or the cheap music they were blasting. What burned me up was the sheer arrogance. She had actually handed it off like it was hers to give. The marine deputy cut the engine as we approached. My boat floated gently near the sandbar, anchored lazily in the shallows. I recognized the 2 teenagers from the footage, lounging on the stern with their feet in the water. One of them was wearing my old Coast Guard cap. Probably found it below deck and thought it made him look official. Judith stood at the helm, sunglasses on, arms crossed like she was conducting a yacht tour. The marine deputy raised his voice over the wind. "Step away from the console and identify yourselves." Judith turned, clearly caught off guard by the uniform. "This is private recreation." "You're disrupting a sanctioned HOA event." He didn't even flinch. We have a report of stolen property. Step off the vessel now." She tried to argue, but the sheriff's deputy cut in. "Judith Zimmerman, you are being detained in connection with the unauthorized use of this boat. We have video evidence and a formal complaint on record." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The teenagers didn't wait for instructions. They jumped off the side and started paddling toward the shore like rats off a sinking ship. Judith, on the other hand, doubled down. "This is a misunderstanding. The HOA has a collective interest in all coastal access points, including docks. That makes this boat part of community oversight." The deputy gave me a look as if to say, "Is she serious?" I nodded. "She's read one too many HOA newsletters." They escorted her off the boat and onto the marine unit. I stepped aboard mine to inspect the interior. Nothing looked stolen, but drawers had been rifled through and a few compartments left open. One of my tackle boxes was upside down, hooks and lures scattered across the floor like someone had been digging for gold. "She let kids rummage through the gear," I said, holding up a snapped rod. "This was custom made." The deputy photographed the damage, then handed me a receipt of property recovery and a copy of the incident report. I signed, watching as Judith sat on the bench of the patrol boat, arms folded and glaring daggers at the horizon. Back on land, the formal arrest happened quickly. 2 more deputies arrived at the marina and placed her in handcuffs. She protested in that shrill, overly articulate tone that people use when they think sounding smart will get them out of trouble. "I am the elected president of the Seabreeze Homeowners Association. I represent over 60 homeowners. This is political retaliation." The arresting officer didn't even blink. "You're being charged with grand theft of property exceeding $50,000, unlawful use of a watercraft, and trespassing. You can explain the rest to a judge." As they read her rights, I stayed silent. No satisfaction, no smugness, just a quiet, burning sense of vindication. Later that evening, I met with Deputy Harrington back at the station to finalize the witness statement. He was reviewing the footage again, this time with an investigator from the state attorney's office. "She orchestrated the whole thing," I said. "Gave them keys, stood on my dock like it was hers, she even watched them leave." The investigator nodded. "We're looking into whether she's done this before. If she's misrepresented HOA authority in other situations, we might be looking at a pattern of abuse." I handed over the HOA newsletter she'd circulated the month before. One section caught their attention. "All water-adjacent properties are subject to shared recreational access, per revised community guidelines." "That's not enforceable," I said. "It contradicts county zoning laws and the property deeds." The investigator tapped the paper. "If she distributed this to residents under the guise of authority, that's fraud. And if she used that fraud to gain access to private property, that's a criminal enhancement." That's when things really started to unravel. I didn't hear anything for 2 weeks. My boat was back, the dock was repaired, and I figured that was the end of it. But then a woman named Elise knocked on my door, early 40s, schoolteacher type, nervous smile, folder clutched to her chest. "I heard what happened," she said. "Judith did something similar to my husband last year. He runs a paddleboard rental. She tried to fine him for unauthorized shoreline commerce and threatened to revoke his beach access if he didn't give HOA members free lessons." She handed me a stack of emails, all printed and highlighted. "We didn't think we had a case, but you got her arrested." That changes everything. By the end of the week, I had 6 more neighbors come forward. A retired couple who'd been fined for their garden gnome because it reflected sunlight into Judith's window. A nurse who'd been accused of unsanctioned exterior lighting for putting up motion sensors. 2 veterans who'd been denied permission to fly a flagpole over wind hazard concerns. Each had emails, letters, or HOA newsletters with Judith's signature. Each one showed a pattern of her inventing rules and enforcing them with threats and intimidation. I compiled everything into a single document and forwarded it to the state attorney's office under the heading, Seabreeze Shores, HOA patterns of abuse and fraudulent authority. The reply came back in 3 days. They were opening a formal investigation into the HOA board. Not just Judith, but the whole leadership team. Turns out, several of the board members had been appointed without a vote. Bylaws were being rewritten without resident approval. Annual meetings hadn't been properly recorded for the last 2 years. Judith had been running the place like her own little kingdom, and no one had challenged her until now. When the subpoenas dropped, it was like someone kicked over a hornet's nest. Residents started holding their own meetings in cul-de-sacs and backyards. People who had never spoken more than a polite hello at the mailbox were suddenly swapping stories, sharing paperwork, and organizing petitions. A retired paralegal down the street offered to help file a motion to dissolve the current HOA board entirely. And through it all, Judith sat in county jail waiting for her hearing. I didn't attend the arraignment, but I heard from Elise that it didn't go well for her. The judge denied bail due to the community impact of her actions and the mounting evidence of ongoing fraud. Meanwhile, the deputy from the Marine unit stopped by one afternoon to return an extra copy of the footage I'd submitted. "You've got a lot of people talking," he said. "Apparently this neighborhood's about to get a whole lot quieter." I offered him a cold drink and pointed to the boat bobbing gently at the dock. "You're welcome aboard anytime," I said. "Just knock first." He laughed and shook my hand. As he walked away, I looked out at the bay. The water was calm, the sun dipping low in the sky. For the first time since moving to Seabreeze Shores, I felt like I actually owned my home. Not just the house or the dock, but the peace that came with knowing that no one had the right to take it from me and Judith. She was finally where she belonged, behind bars, with no clipboard in sight. By the time Seabreeze Shores had its emergency town hall, the clubhouse was standing room only. Folding chairs scraped against the tile floor as 100 neighbors filed in, some with binders, others with manila folders stuffed with HOA correspondence. No one wore a smile. The air was thick with something electric anticipation, maybe, or the collective realization that we'd all been played for fools by the same person. I stood near the back, flanked by Elise and her husband, Greg. A few of the veterans nodded as I passed, and a couple of folks I'd never even met offered handshakes. It wasn't gratitude exactly. It was solidarity, the kind that only forms after people realize they've been lied to by someone they trusted, or at least tolerated. Up front, a temporary moderator Archero, a former city zoning officer, cleared his throat and tapped the mic. "We're here under emergency provision," he began. "Due to the current legal incapacitation of the sitting HOA president and the absence of a functioning board quorum, this meeting is being held in accordance with Florida statute to address community governance." No one clapped, no one coughed. The silence was surgical. Archero continued. "Since the arrest of Judith Zimmerman, multiple residents have submitted formal complaints regarding fraudulent enforcement actions, unauthorized fines, and violations of state HOA statutes. We've compiled those and submitted them to the Department of Business and Professional Regulation, and we've also been contacted by the state attorney's office. As of this morning, a grand jury has been asked to review the matter." Murmurs rippled across the room. A man near the front raised his hand. "I'm sorry, did you say grand jury?" Archero nodded. "Yes. Based on the cumulative evidence, the state is exploring charges that go well beyond petty HOA misconduct. They're investigating potential wire fraud, misappropriation of collected dues, and unlawful seizure of private property." I leaned in slightly. That last one had my attention. Another woman stood up near the side wall holding a folder. "My name's Tanya. I'm a forensic accountant." I reviewed the last 2 years of financial statements from the HOA website. We're missing nearly $30,000. Dues collected but never itemized, lots of administrative expenses with no receipts, and the vendor listed for landscaping services. It's not a real company. It's registered to a P.O. box in Judith's maiden name. The room erupted, not loud, not angry, just stunned. A neighbor in front of me dropped their pen. Someone else gasped audibly. Archero held up both hands. I know, that's why we're doing this right. We've retained an outside legal consultant to walk us through the process of dissolving the current board and setting up an independent audit. Greg turned to me. She wasn't just drunk on authority, she was cashing out. I nodded slowly. And using kids to take boats. She's lucky she didn't get someone hurt. The next hour rolled into a flurry of motions, votes, and procedural steps. Archero guided us like a man who'd seen his share of bureaucratic messes, and by the end of it, we had elected a temporary oversight committee, 7 residents with no prior connection to the board, each vetted and confirmed in the room. Elise was among them. So was Tanya. They moved fast. The committee filed a court petition to freeze the HOA's bank account and subpoenaed its transaction history. Tanya volunteered to compile a forensic report. A retired judge from a few blocks over offered to draft the ethics complaint. It was like everyone in the neighborhood had just remembered what they were capable of. That night I returned to my dock. The boat sat under a pale moon, quiet and still. I stepped aboard, checked the locks, and did a sweep of the cabin. Nothing new out of place. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the calm was deceptive. That feeling was validated 2 mornings later when I received a call from a detective named Parnell with the state attorney's office. "I'm investigating the Zimmerman case," he said. "Your footage was instrumental in getting the arrest warrant. I'd like to ask you a few more questions." "Sure," I said. "What's going on?" "We've uncovered a pattern of fraudulent insurance claims connected to the HOA. At least 3 homeowners were pressured into accepting storm damage settlements processed through a shell company. That company is linked to a bank account controlled by Zimmerman's cousin. We believe she was orchestrating a kickback scheme." I paused. "And the victims didn't know?" "Not at first. The checks looked official. The HOA would send out a notice recommending preemptive exterior repairs after storms, then offer to process it through their preferred contractor. But the work was never done, and the contractor doesn't exist." "That's federal wire fraud," I said, thinking out loud. "Exactly. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit is reviewing it now. If it crosses state lines, it escalates." I exhaled slowly. "This started with a stolen boat." Parnell let out a dry laugh, "and it might end with a RICO case." The next day, I was served a subpoena to testify before the grand jury. I wasn't nervous. I'd been in enough debriefings during my Coast Guard days to know that the truth, spoken plainly, carried weight. The hearing was held in a tall, gray building downtown. Ornate ceilings, marble floors, the kind of place that made you instinctively walk straighter. I sat in a waiting room beside Elise and Greg, who were also called to testify. No one spoke much. We didn't need to. When my name was called, I entered the chamber, raised my hand, and swore to tell the truth. Then I laid it all out. The note on my door, the footage, the GPS tracker, the arrest. I told them about the town hall, the fake landscaping company, the missing funds. I told them about the neighbors who'd come forward, the documents they'd shared, and the growing mountain of misconduct. When the prosecutor asked if I believed Judith Zimmerman had used her position for personal gain, I didn't hesitate. She treated the HOA like a private vault. She used fake authority to manipulate people into compliance. And when that didn't work, she stole from them. When I stepped out of the chamber, Elise and Greg gave me a quiet nod. Behind them, Tanya emerged from a side room, clutching a thumb drive. She looked tired but resolute. Back at Seabreeze Shores, the cleanup had already begun. The Oversight Committee suspended all active HOA fines pending review. Neighbors who'd been bullied into removing flagpoles or repainting their shutters were now filing reimbursement claims. An attorney from the state's Consumer Protection Division set up a temporary help desk in the clubhouse. And then the media got wind of it. A local news van showed up one afternoon, parking just outside the gates. A reporter in a blue blazer interviewed Elise near the community sign. I stayed out of frame, not interested in 15 minutes of fame. But I watched as she explained, calmly and clearly, how a single person's abuse of power had turned a quiet neighborhood into a playground for fraud, and how the residents had rallied to take it back. A week later, the grand jury returned its decision: indictment on 8 counts, including grand theft, identity fraud, racketeering, and obstruction of justice. Judith would not be returning to Seabreeze Shores. The new board voted to terminate the HOA's contract with its legal counsel, an old college friend of Judith's, and hired a new firm to draft a revised charter that required full transparency, quarterly reports, and term limits. They even created a digital portal where residents could view every financial transaction in real time. I didn't run for a board seat. I didn't want one. I just wanted my dock, my boat, and the freedom to enjoy them without interference. One evening, as I stood on the pier watching the sun dip into the Gulf, Tanya stopped by with a manila envelope. "Final audit report," she said. "We recovered $26,000 from frozen accounts. The rest's likely gone or buried under fake businesses." "But it's a start." I opened it briefly, leafed through the pages, then handed it back. "You're doing good work." "So are you," she said. "You set the fire." I shook my head. "Just lit the match." "This community brought the fuel." She smiled, not the polite kind, but the kind you give when you've seen the worst of something and lived to fix it and walked away. The sky burned orange, the water calm again. For the first time since this began, I felt something deeper than relief. I felt proud. 6 weeks after the indictment, Seabreeze Shores looked like a completely different place. The tension that used to hang thick over every hedge and porch swing had lifted, replaced with the kind of cautious optimism you only see when people realize the worst might be behind them. Lawns still got mowed, mail still got delivered, but now folks waved when they passed each other. Some even stopped to chat. That hadn't happened in years. I'd spent the morning reinforcing the cleats on my dock, part of a project I'd been putting off since the whole nightmare started. Elise stopped by just before noon, this time with a rolled-up blueprint under one arm and a thermos in the other. "They approved the community park expansion," she said, handing me a mug. "No more backdoor deals, no more HOA vetoes, voted on it fair and square." I tapped the blueprint. "What's going in?" "Open-air pavilion, kayak racks, a real seawall, and no one's getting told to repaint their house if a seagull sneezes on it," I laughed. "Progress." She nodded toward the house next door where an older couple was setting up a table under a canopy. "They're hosting a neighborhood potluck tonight, said it's a kind of post-Zimmerman exorcism. You coming?" I hesitated. "I don't usually do potlucks." "You do now," she said, giving me a look that brokered no argument. I showed up just before sunset, a tray of smoked mullet under my arm and a cooler in tow. The entire cul-de-sac had transformed into a makeshift festival. Kids zipped past on scooters. Someone had strung lights between the mailbox posts. A local jazz trio was setting up beneath the street lamp, and folding chairs lined the curbs like theater seats. Archero was manning the grill, wearing a cap that said, "HOA free and loving it." Tanya was already surrounded by a group of residents poring over a chart labeled New Budget Priorities. I found a spot near the food table, and before long, people I barely knew were introducing themselves by first name instead of lot number. A man named Calvin told me about the time Judith tried to ban his therapy dog from the community path because it looked too serious. Another woman leaned in and whispered about how she once caught Judith measuring grass height with a ruler, and then someone mentioned the trial date. It had been scheduled quickly, unusually quickly, for a case involving financial crime. According to the assistant DA I'd spoken to during pre-trial prep, the volume of hard evidence had left Judith's defense team with little wiggle room. The state didn't just have a paper trail, they had wire transfers, bank records, even audio from a phone call where she tried to intimidate a board member into deleting old meeting logs. I heard she's trying to flip on her cousin, someone added. Too late for that, said Elise. The cousin already flipped on her. In the days that followed, subpoenas kept hitting mailboxes. I got another call from Detective Parnell, who let me know that federal charges were being filed alongside the state case. Apparently, the fake contractor shell company had processed payments from 3 different counties, which made it a multi-jurisdictional fraud case. She's looking at real time, he said, not just a slap on the wrist. We're talking years. The trial started on a Monday, and I was called to testify again, this time in front of a jury. The courtroom was packed, mostly with people from the neighborhood. Judith sat at the defense table, wearing a navy blazer that made her look like she was applying for a job she was wildly unqualified for. She didn't look over once. Not at me, not at any of the residents. Just stared straight ahead like if she ignored us hard enough, we'd vanish. The prosecutor asked me questions I'd already answered a dozen times, but this time was different. This time, 12 strangers had to be convinced. I explained the layout of my deeded dock, how I'd installed cameras, how the GPS tracker led me and the sheriff straight to my boat. I described the footage, how Judith had handed off my keys like she was running a rental kiosk, how she'd waved them off like the queen of the marina. After showing the video to the jury, the room was dead silent. Even the judge raised his brows slightly. Then came the financial evidence. Tanya took the stand, walking the jury through each phony invoice, each missing receipt. She explained how the landscaping company was nothing more than a mailbox in a strip mall that hadn't been leased in over a year. Federal agents confirmed that the same account had received transfers from other HOA communities where Judith's cousin served on advisory boards. And then came the wire fraud. The jury listened to a recorded call in which Judith instructed her cousin to relabel a reimbursement as a storm damage supplement and to keep the totals just under $5,000 to avoid triggering audits. Her voice was unmistakable calm, clipped, and completely without remorse. By the time closing arguments wrapped up, the defense had offered nothing but vague claims of community improvement and misunderstandings. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours, guilty on all counts. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge didn't hold back. Miss Zimmerman, he said, you manipulated your neighbors, misused your authority, and committed fraud across multiple jurisdictions. You turned a neighborhood into a racket. You have shown no remorse, and your actions endangered the trust that holds communities together. He sentenced her to 7 years in federal prison with no chance of parole for the first 5. She was also ordered to pay restitution to all affected residents, along with a permanent injunction barring her from holding any official position in a residential association ever again. Back at Seabreeze Shores, the changes kept coming. The HOA officially transitioned into a voluntary neighborhood committee. Dues became optional, and every expenditure had to be approved by a public vote. Tanya's financial portal went live, and within days, residents were logging in just to marvel at how transparent it all was. Archero stepped down from his interim position to let a new round of elections take place. No one campaigned. They just nominated neighbors they trusted and let the votes fall where they may. Even the city council took notice, citing Seabreeze Shores as a model for how communities could recover from mismanagement without collapsing into chaos. A small grant was awarded to fund the new park expansion, and the local police chief sent a letter thanking the residents for their cooperation during the investigation. I didn't go to every meeting. Didn't need to. I'd done my part, and the neighborhood had taken the baton and run with it. One evening, I returned from a supply run and found a small envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a note handwritten in blue ink. Because of you, I didn't sell my house. I stayed, and now it feels like a home again. Thank you. No name, just that. I stood there for a long time, the wind coming off the bay, the dock creaking just slightly under its own weight. For the first time in a long while, there was nothing left to fix, no one left to chase. Just the quiet and the knowledge that this battered, beautiful, stubborn little neighborhood had finally taken its power back. And all it took was one stolen boat, a camera, and the resolve to say, "Not here."